So before we begin this podcast, we would first like to acknowledge Johnny Varellis for editing and producing this content. Johnny runs a YouTube channel called The Lone Chemist, on which he provides commentary on film, music, media, politics, and anything else he finds interesting, using the formats of live podcasts, film, and album reviews and video essays, all from the analytical point of view of a chemistry graduate student.
Please go to his channel at youtube.com/thelongchemist to watch his content. Subscribe and let him know what you'd like to see covered next. Again, that's youtube.com/thelongchemist. Okay, welcome to our Faces of Science interview. My name is Jiaqi Li.
And I'm Andrea DeQuino.
We are members of Northwestern Building on Diversity, better known as NUBonD. We're a graduate student-led organization within the chemistry department at Northwestern, whose primary goal is to foster a community built on inclusivity and diversity.
One of the ways we accomplish this is by inviting guest speakers who have established themselves as renowned scientists and who have simultaneously addressed a multitude of systemic barriers that hinder diversity and inclusion in STEM.
Scientists often have many chances to showcase their scientific work, but rarely do we have the opportunity to learn about the person behind their scientific interests. We are thrilled to debut our Faces of Science interview with Professor Akua Asa-Awuku from the University of Maryland. Thank you, Professor Asa-Awuku, for joining us and giving us the opportunity to get to know you. So, to get started, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to come join you here at Northwestern. It's been great so far. This is my first podcast, so I'm excited to answer your questions. So who am I? I am a Ghanaian-American scholar in chemical engineering. My research is in particles in the atmosphere and how these particles influence air quality and climate.
And can you tell us a little bit about where you went to graduate school, how you decided to choose to go to graduate school and to further pursue a postdoc and a career in academia?
Okay, all right. So how did I get into graduate school? So when I was an undergraduate, I actually had very little research experience. Now that I look back at it, and I see all these applications now, that's really rare to have very little research experience. But at the time, my mentor was the chair of MIT, Bob Armstrong, and he had graduated from Georgia Tech. And I had told him that I had an interest in teaching. And so he said, you know, Georgia Tech has a great program in terms of allowing students, PhD students, the opportunity to essentially TA every year. And so he said, that's definitely a school that you should apply to. So I applied to Georgia Tech in the idea that I was going to be a teacher, right? I had very little research experience. I think I did some simulation models for a professor for maybe like a semester, but it really didn't go far, like in-depth lab experience and a lot of connection with the graduate student at the time. But I got in and I went to Georgia Tech. I said I was going to do some topic that on my application. I didn't end up doing that topic at all. And so I should step back and I should say that before I left, I had a job where I was a dishwasher for a bioengineering lab. And I told them I was going to Georgia Tech, and they said, well, when you get there, it's good to look at the project, but really look into who you will work for as a supervisor and make sure that you can have a connection with them, make sure that you can get along with a supervisor. And so that really guided the course of what research projects that I would be interested in. And so I met my supervisor at the time, Athanasios Nenes, and he just had a great personality. He had the excitement for atmospheric research. At the time, he was an assistant professor. He'd only been there a year. So it was kind of a gamble, we say, going for the assistant professor, the non-tenured professor. But, he was just a rock star. He was great. I mean, it was definitely clear that he was going to get tenure, which he did, and he did it really quickly. And so the project was interesting. Atmospheric particles were interesting. How they affect clouds was interesting. So I really fell in love with the project.
And so can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to pursue a career in academia, and what were some of the obstacles that you faced while you were pursuing that career path?
Well, yeah, I said I wanted to be a teacher. I didn't have a really good idea about academia. I didn't have anybody in my own family who was a professor, especially at U.S. institutions or anything like that. So this whole idea of teaching what the structures within academia were, I had no clue. Teaching was what I liked. And so I went to Georgia Tech. In addition to the teaching, I started to do research. As many of you know, research is a lot of stress. And having a supervisor who was an assistant professor, I could see how much work he did, right? I could see he was constantly traveling, constantly presenting, constantly writing papers, really trying to build a group, right? And I thought to myself, that's not what I want to do with my life. And so after the first year, and even the second year, I began to question if academia was really for me. And so I started to look into other avenues for PhDs and engineers at the time. So things like consulting, things like industrial positions. But in the meantime, I also signed up for workshops. There was a workshop called Negotiating the Ideal Faculty Position, right, which was offered through Rice University, and they did that for several years. And so I went to one of those workshops, and they talk about, okay, how to get your resume ready, what you should look for, and things like that. It was always in the back of my mind that this is something that I should consider. And so it wasn't until maybe my fourth year, or the beginning of my fifth year, where I really made a commitment that academia was where I wanted to go. And so by that time I decided, well, if I want to go to academia, everybody says, look for a postdoc, right? And so the fall of my fifth year was postdoc time. I went to the conferences, I met with the faculty members, I really want to get a postdoc in your area and things like that, and I secured a postdoc. At that same time, around November, I was asked to put in an application for an assistant professor position at UC Riverside. I was like, I'm trying to finish the thesis, let's move on. And then my advisor said, have you put in that application? I said, no. December came, January came, have you put in the application? Okay, let me put in the application. Skip forward to April. That's when I was doing the thesis defense. They then invited me out for an interview. And so I went to the interview, and then they offered me a position. Now, I've already agreed to a postdoc position at Carnegie Mellon at this time, so I had to mention that I was going to do a year postdoc before I could actually begin the position as an academic. So I went to become a postdoc, right? And they say become a postdoc because you learn, it's training ground to be an assistant professor. Yes and no. The postdoc, I enjoyed my PhD, but the postdoc is a glorious time, right? Especially the short postdoc that I did. It was funded, right? I got to sit and think. I felt as a PhD, a lot of the projects that I was doing, it was from one to the other. It was very, I didn't have time to think about how it connected, right? And then as a postdoc, I had a great supervisor, Neil Donahue. He's quite hands-off, but he allows you to come up with your own projects, think about them, and navigate that space. And so I had time to do that as a postdoc. And that really helped. It helps train your brain to be an assistant professor, right? Because you have to come up with your own projects as an assistant professor, right? What are you gonna do, right? And having that time to think helped. So I did that, but it's not quite the same. When you're an assistant professor, there's just so many different obstacles you face. That's the question, right? What are the obstacles that you face? it's kind of like running your own business. There's the people side, right? This is a chemistry department, right? People are not molecules, right? Molecules you can kind of manipulate, and you're going to make a reaction, and this is the product. This is what you're going to get. People are not like that. And in academia, there's people on different levels, right? There's students, there's your researchers, there's your colleagues, there's the department, and everybody has different motivations, right? And so we're trained as PhDs to really understand, inanimate objects, molecules, and things like that, and to translate some of those into managerial skills may not be something that we've had in the past. And so that's a real obstacle when starting a new assistant professorship position, I would say.
So just follow up. So since this is the biggest challenge you faced, then how did you overcome the difficulties? Like, how did you learn what to deal with these different relationships with faculty or with students?
Okay. In my experience, the most successful professors are able to adapt, okay? We all have our own innate personalities, right? You can take a Myers-Briggs. We won't get into that. But, there's certain personality types you can say, oh, I'm this way, right? It's great to understand yourself, but even more important, it is to be able to adapt to different situations, right? And so, in my opinion, some of the best professors you see, they can adapt to the individuals who join their groups in terms of mentorship. When a funding source disappears, they're able to adapt and look into a new funding source, right? They're able to be creative, think of new ideas, right? When you look at science, if you're able to apply something from one discipline to another discipline and merge it into something new, right? That will make you successful. So the ability to adapt, be quick on your feet, right? Really helps in terms of pushing through those types of obstacles.
To follow up on that, do you think that this ability to adapt is inherent to some people and to others they have to learn it? And is everyone capable of learning how to adapt in this way like you have?
I think everybody's capable of learning how to adapt. I should say the culture where I'm from, we have symbols, and one of these symbols is the crocodile, right? And the crocodile is a symbol of adaptation, right? He lives in the water and he lives on the land. There's also a saying that goes with it. I don't remember what it is, but it's a little different thing, right? But the ability to transcend different mediums, right, is something that you can learn and apply in your life to be successful. I think as a PhD student, the course of your PhD, you will learn to adapt somehow, right? I always think of the PhD as a journey through a tunnel, right? The first year, second year, you're entering this tunnel, you can still see the light behind you. You're happy, right? It's a joyous time. Around the third year, PhD students enter the middle of the tunnel. It's dark. It's very dark. You may not see any light there. You have to pull yourself, and you have to really believe that there's an exit at this tunnel, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Fourth year, you should start seeing some light, right? And you should start hurrying up and being like, I gotta get to the end of this, I'm done, right? Yeah. And so for many of the PhD students that I've mentored, and my own experience, that's what it's been like. Just joyous, happy, not so happy, that's okay. But knowing that this journey too has an end point, right? And there is light at the end of the tunnel where success is at the end.
Go ahead.
So could you give us more specific example, it could be you yourself or your students who went through this dark period and then finally succeed.
Finally success.
Yeah.
Okay. As I mentioned, all my students go through this process, and some for different reasons, right? Some of the challenges are personal challenges. 5 years is a big chunk of time for something to happen to you, right? Mm-hmm. I had one student, and she got into a car accident, right? That's very unexpected, right? But that affects your ability to do work, right? Mm-hmm. That's any type of health issue can affect your ability to do work, right? How do you push through it, right? At some point, she had to take some time off to recuperate, right? She really wasn't willing to do that because it's you don't want to stop, right? Mm-hmm. Especially a lot of PhD students. We want to be successful. It's hard for us to say no. It's hard for us to quit, right? And it feels like quitting when you take time off. Mm-hmm. And so she had to take some time off. It was about 8 weeks she took off, which is like a long time in our lives. 8 weeks of not doing research, of not writing or anything. She completely de-enrolled from the program. And I said, at the end of those 8 weeks, you can decide whether you want to come back. She came back. She's like, I'm coming back. I'm doing this. I don't know what happened, whether she sat on the couch for 8 weeks and was totally bored, but she came back renewed to complete her projects, finish essentially the papers, and finish the dissertation and get out. Okay, that's one example. Sometimes the obstacle is not necessarily the student, or it happens to the student. Sometimes it's the advisor. I had one student, and I put him on this, what I thought was a really interesting project. And, I was convinced that the chemistry of this particle was really going to influence the droplet measurement. So I had him working on that for like 3 years. All his results said it had no influence, right? Mm-hmm. And so that challenge is, okay, the project itself is not simple. The project does not have a clear-cut answer you're not going to get results within 6 months like some other projects, right? And so really if we look at the first 3 years of his PhD, they didn't generate the majority of the results for his thesis. He now has like 4 or 5 papers, but there was only one paper that took 3 years, and the rest took 1.5 years, right? So if you think about the productivity of that student, it was very flat for the first 3 years, which can be very disheartening, right? I understand that as a supervisor. But to be able to break through that type of obstacle and then really push through and generate, the last chapters and the papers of your thesis, I thought was incredible. And the entire time he's like, I haven't really done much. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, it's fine. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Just keep on working. And lo and behold, he was able to break through and have that type of productivity and papers at the end of a successful PhD.
It's always good to hear a happy ending to that kind of story. PhDs are pretty uncertain, right? And I think along those lines, I'm curious about what you think are key components to being a good mentor and supervisor, because you have had some really terrific mentors in your life, as you mentioned in your talk yesterday, and there were people who saw things in you very early in your life that you may not have been able to see yourself. And so how do supervisors become really great mentors? You have done a fantastic job mentoring your own students.
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah.
Nobody really teaches you how to mentor.
Yeah.
So you kind of wing it, right? Can I say that?
Oh yeah, you can say that.
Can I say that? Okay, everybody knows my secret. I'm winging it. I'm totally winging it when it comes to supervision. I believe you need to treat each person as an individual. Look at their strengths, look at their weaknesses. If you can, you want to tailor projects for your students that lend to their strengths, okay? That's the first part, right? But then there's also the social part, the human part. We are not just robots, scientific robots here, just gathering data. We need motivation along the way. When you're deep in that dark tunnel, somebody has to be there to like hold your hand and say, make it to the end, right? Mm-hmm. Just keep on going, because it is a lonely place in that tunnel. And to feel like you're that alone can be very demoralizing, right? Mm-hmm. So as a supervisor, as a mentor, I'm also like a coach, right? A life coach. Sometimes I just say, just do it.
That's a great line.
Just trust me and do what I say, and you'll make it to the end. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, as a life coach, sometimes you have to give somebody a hug, right? Because that's what they need. That's why I say I'm winging it. It depends on the person. Some people don't like hugs. You just got to know that from the energy of people. And so just to summarize, there's a scientific component to the mentoring, but there's also a human component to the mentoring. And it's a way of meshing both of those to make sure that people are successful at the end.
I love that answer. I think that was exactly what many people need to hear. Then, go for it. You want to ask a question?
Let's move on to more diversity part.
Okay, sure.
I'm really curious why diversity is important, or why diversity in science is important to you.
Oh, well, as a Black woman, without diversity in sciences, I wouldn't be here. So, why is it important to me? It's important like water is important to me. I need it to live. I need it to thrive. For me, diversity enhances just the, not the fabric, but the satisfaction of where I work. Mm-hmm. I like different things. I like to learn about new things. This is why I'm in science, right? Mm-hmm. If I saw the same thing over and over again, I would be bored. And the same goes with students and people and colleagues, right? I like to hear different opinions. I like to have discussions about different opinions and different thoughts. You're not going to get that with the same people in the room, right? Quite honestly, sometimes I go to conferences, I'm like, oh, we're talking about the same thing again. Where's a fresh new thought, right? And that's what diversity brings to sciences. It brings a different perspective. So yes, it's important to me. I love to have it. And people think so differently from different cultures. I mean, you're just raised in such different ways that your perspective on something is just never the same as somebody else's. And so to have that, it's critical. It's critical to science.
Along those lines, I think about diversity and inclusion. I think those two words are talked about a lot, but a lot of people, I don't think, fully understand the impact of both diversity and inclusion and how different they are. And so when I think about diversity, I think about being invited to a party, right? And inclusion is being asked to dance at that party. And so, right, there are a lot of universities that are trying and taking steps towards becoming more diverse, inviting people to their institutions from diverse backgrounds. But then when it comes to inclusion, inclusion is really about providing people the resources to be on an equal playing field and to really be successful in that institution. So what are some things that you think institutions could be doing better, or that they could be doing, period, to improve upon inclusion and better support diversity?
Yeah, I like that analogy.
I like dancing.
I love dancing. You don't mind if I steal that from you? I'm gonna
Go
borrow
for it.
that.
You
That's
go for
great.
it. I'm sure I read it somewhere.
Yeah. Being invited to dance. No, you said being at the party, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can get to the party, but am I just gonna stand in the corner, or am I gonna be invited to dance? That's great. I love it. And we don't extend scientifically those invitations very much.
Yeah.
We got to the point where we consider the invitation to the party, but the invitation to dance, we definitely need to work on. Some people are just like, well, you're here, I'm here. Why do I have to ask you to dance? Why don't you ask me to dance, right?
Yeah.
And we have to recognize that when you are a part of a marginalized background, right, the challenge just to get to the party itself is huge. And for those of us who've been to many parties, we have to extend that hand. So what can we do? We can have groups where it's not just one person at the party, but it's a whole group. It's a seed, right? So you don't feel alone. That's the worst thing. Me, when I go to parties, I'm an introvert. I like to bring one of my best friends. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to this party, you're coming with me, Yeah. I know a lot of people do that, and that's just because it's great to have somebody that you can connect to already, that you know who's there, right? And so it's okay to invite one person, but we really need to invite multiple people, not just like a cohort, right? And we do these things in academia all the time, especially when it comes to cluster hiring, right? That's the idea of cluster hiring, that we have one discipline that we really want to build, and so we don't just bring in one faculty member, but we bring in like 5 or 6, and they're all gonna work together and make the center wonderful. We can do those types of things for diverse people, right? It's not just, oh, we'll just bring in one this year and they'll do fine. No, we need to bring in a seed, and we need to bring in a group that can grow. So they also have somebody at their party where they feel comfortable and they belong. It's not just them by themselves. Yeah.
So we were just talking about the university level. So is there anything you did or you think we or professors can do on a group level, how to improve the diversity and inclusivity?
Yeah. I'm a firm believer in mentoring at all levels, right? So I mentor PhD students, graduate students, undergraduate students are in my lab, right? My PhD students, my master's students mentor undergraduate students. They also mentor K through 12 students. It's providing these different opportunities for people to see science and engineering. That is really critical. The more opportunities you have, the more familiar you become. And then maybe it's only for a summer, maybe it's only for a week. Maybe it's only like a day or two on a college campus, right? I've been to a lot of college campuses. Now when I go to a college campus, I'm like, oh yeah. I feel at home, right? But the first time you're on a college campus and you've never felt that way before, it could be kind of daunting, right? These big buildings, some of them Gothic looking, some of them very modern. You're not used to that. But the more you spend time going to these places, the more you feel comfortable. And so providing opportunities across all levels, it doesn't have to be as complicated as you need to do a PhD thesis, right? It's an opportunity it's, I guess, for inclusion for different people.
I want to come back to the idea that you spoke about earlier about adapting. I really like this notion, and I hadn't ever really thought about it this way, but that's how people are very successful, those that can adapt. And I think there are many students that come from a wide variety of backgrounds that are not represented in universities, and they've had to overcome a lot of obstacles. They've had to adapt. And so maybe you can speak a little bit to that and why that might be even more so important for fostering the next generation of really great scientists, and how important adapting and coming from a diverse background, how those two overlap, and how important it is to forwarding science.
Okay, that's a tough question.
My question's always long. They're really long-winded.
So, the issue of adaptability, especially for persons of color, is hard, right? You have a certain culture, you have a certain experience, right? You have family obligations, right? That really resonate as to who you are, right? And sometimes those obligations are constantly pulling you towards them, right? Don't be acting so strange, you know? That's not who you are. This is who you are, right? But then to come to a situation that you're unfamiliar with, right? You have to adapt. And is it giving up some of your soul? You know, sometimes it feels like that, right? I would say no. This is when I say it's the crocodile, right? This is why we have the crocodile as a symbol. Crocodile lives on land, it lives on water, it breathes seamlessly. It's been able to adapt. And so really it's a growth. You have to think of it as a growth. So the second part of that question was, okay, if you're able to grow like that, how does that affect your ability in science, right? How does that affect your ability for the PhD and the rigor of academia? It makes you resilient. It makes you resilient. Some people can only, live in the water. That's as good as they're going to do. You don't want to be that person. You want to have the resilience to move back and forth with ease, as the crocodile does, I guess. I don't know if I answered that question.
Yeah, you did. Yes,
Yeah.
you did. Maybe, can I ask one more question? Yeah. So I'm curious if you have any, as you reflect back on your career path and through graduate school, your postdoc, and now in your academic career, if there were pieces of advice that you received or that you would like to give to students. I mean, you've already given us lots of great pieces of advice, but if there's anything that you would like to tell students and advise them during their paths, what would some of those pieces of advice be?
Oh, I mean, I've received a lot of good advice. I have great mentors. I have a lot of great champions, right? There's a difference between a mentor and a champion.
Can you tell us what you see as the big difference?
So mentors give you advice that you take, collect with you, you move on. Champions are people in the room when you're not there who elevate your position, right? They're your letter writers. They're the people who nominate you for awards and tell you, okay, yeah, she really deserves that award, right? And so not all mentors will do that, right? But champions are the ones who are really going to push your career forward. And so the question is, what type of advice have I received?
Or if you just have advice for students going throughout their PhD and pursuing their careers.
Pursuing their careers.
Yeah.
Know who you are. Be comfortable with who you are. Start there, and then figure out how you can grow. The PhD, we do research. It is a degree. like any other degree where we are learning. We're learning about science, but we're also learning about ourselves during the process. Many of us travel far, for the PhDs. It's not like it was 50 years ago. Many of us are travel across states, internationally. We're very far from home, right? This is sometimes the first time that we're so distant from our support system. And so we really need to figure out how to thrive by ourselves, right? How to establish new connections, how to kind of make a new family where you are, right? In addition to the stress of work, right? And that being said, it's okay. It's okay to sometimes be unhappy. It's okay to be happy, right? You will have these emotions. Life is all about up and down. You can't know true happiness without knowing true sadness, okay? And moving through that, experiencing those emotions will make you stronger, it will make you more resilient, it will make you a better person overall. So, as a PhD student, just accept that this is a challenge, right? You are tackling a scientific problem, right? You're also tackling a human problem, the personal problem. How do you go through it? Gather your experiences, analyze the data, move forward, come to some conclusions, make some decisions. Those are the same things that you do in science, you can do for your own personal life as well. Yeah.
So I'm still curious, if you are just in the middle of all the different kinds of problems, how did you just get through or make a work and life or maybe something else balance? How do you balance all of this?
It's a juggling act. It really is a juggling act. I won't say everything has been perfect in my life. I mentioned yesterday, at some point, everywhere I traveled, I had to take an extra large tub of Tums wherever I went, extra strength. And, I don't have those issues anymore, but clearly it was stress-related. It was stress-related gastrointestinal issues that I was going through. And that's how my body was responding to it. Why did I mention that? I mentioned that because at that time I didn't even realize that that was a challenge, right? I was powering through, and I was juggling a lot of work. Every once in a while I'd go hang out with my friends. But that work-life satisfaction, I don't use the word balance, right? Because everybody has a different level of balance. Satisfaction is what makes you feel happy. What do you feel satisfied for? I feel satisfied with a lot of work. I do. I realize that. I now have a 4-year-old son, and that first week he was born, when a newborn baby, you just spend all day with the baby, all night and day. I listened to so many podcasts. I needed to learn about stuff, right? While he was that small. I love learning about new information. I love absorbing things. That's my satisfaction. I enjoy work simply because I get to think of new things. I like writing proposals for that. I feel like proposals is kind of like fiction writing, right? You're just like, oh yeah, this is really going to happen. You base it on some data, but you get to essentially think of new ideas and creative ideas. I enjoy that. That's the satisfaction that I have in my life. It's a lot of work, yes, but I'm satisfied from that work. So your question. Can you remind me what your question was again?
Oh, it's just, I think you answered most of that. It's just, I was curious, how did you guide yourself through all the different problems or difficulties? I guess.
Yeah. So my answer to that, now that I think about it, is For me, what drives me, I have a strong sense of obligation. There's some things that I have to do. Maybe I don't like doing them, but I have to do those things, and I get them done, right? And then there's things that bring me joy, right? So it's a combination of doing things that I know have to get done, but also doing things that give me joy. And that's how I kind of juggle this work-life satisfaction. And I'm fine with doing that, as long as I get my obligations done, and as long as I do things that bring me joy, I'm satisfied with the life that I have. Now, the challenge becomes when you have too many obligations, right? You have to balance that. You have to learn how to say no to some of these things. Otherwise, you will constantly feel like you're failing these obligations. And that is demoralizing. So you have to figure out the obligations that give you joy, the obligations that you know have to get done, and juggle that with the things that give you joy.
I love that answer. I also wanted to come back to something you said about listening to a lot of podcasts. You love to learn things, and this seems to be a very typical trend in people in academia. You just have a lot of curiosity. And so what other things do you enjoy learning about, and how do you get inspiration for new projects in your work? So the two kind of separate questions, but maybe they coincide.
Yeah. So I think we talked about this last time. I did Zumba before. Yeah. Right? We love dancing.
Yeah.
So, just an hour or two a week of Zumba, it just gets me really pumped to do the other things. It uses a different side of my brain, so that gives me joy. So where do I get ideas, inspiration? Really from challenging myself. A good example of that is, when I moved institutions, they asked me to teach a statistics class. I do use statistics in my research, right? Most of us do, but I had to prepare an entire statistics course, right? In-depth statistics, using analysis of variance, design of experiments, all these things that I had to prepare formal training for. At first I was like, I don't know if I can do this. When you have a new course to prepare, it really does take a lot of work. But I accepted the challenge. Skip forward a year later. I'm like, I can apply this to this new research idea, right? And then I started writing proposals, which is all about the statistical analysis we can apply to these things and learn all these other, achieve these results from. And I think if I hadn't accepted that first challenge of trying to learn something new, I would have never had these new proposal ideas. As hesitant as I was about it, as tepid, as scared as I was to really take on a new idea, knowing that you have a PhD, that's what the PhD is. You can look into and research something new. You have that ability. I tell my students, as a PhD, you realize most of the stuff in textbooks, you don't need a textbook anymore. You're reading stuff in journal articles. That's where all the new stuff is. And so now, as a PhD, as a doctor in front of your name, you know where to go to look for information, right? And so you shouldn't be afraid of that. You should accept that and then try to use that new information to develop something new. That's all that we're really doing when we're training PhDs. So taking that and then applying that kind of concept to develop new ideas is how I really generate proposals. And sometimes it's going to conferences like, oh yeah, that's a great technique. I wonder if I could try that for this, right? Melding different ideas, and that's really creativity at the end of the day.
I have another question. I was curious about, you have taught your students a tremendous amount, but I wonder, what are some lessons that your students have taught you during your career?
Whoa. Well, you always say, yeah, that's a hard-hitting question. My students teach me patience. That's one thing, right? As supervisors, we're under the gun to make reports, right? Produce data, publish or perish, they say, right?
No, I didn't know they said that.
You didn't know they said that? Publish or perish? Oh, yeah. Publish or perish. But everybody has a different productivity timeline, right? Everybody, all my students have, especially when you have diverse students like I've had, they comes with different strengths and weaknesses, right? And so to get the results that you want from your students, you have to be patient. You have to be patient. Before I had children, I said, oh, my students are like my children, right? Real children take much more patience than adult students. But they've taught me about patience. They've taught me it's okay to be who you are, being open with people, having connections with people is important. And I like to think that, we still have those connections when I see them. Having a supervisor is not just for your PhD, it's forever. And I hope they can feel like they can come to me for anything for the rest of their journeys. Yeah.
I'll ask another question. I was just wondering about if there's anything you would have changed in your career path. If there was something that you wished you would have known, whether, and it could be something, something that none of us would think about, maybe something during your PhD that you wish you'd done different, or maybe something you wish you had tried different, or you'd approached something differently. What are some things that maybe you look back and you may have wanted to do differently, or maybe you don't? Maybe you've loved everything that you've done. And
Oh yeah, everything I've done has been great. No. I've had to grow over the years. I remember we had a dinner conversation. I'm a classic introvert engineer. If you talked to me in high school, I wasn't very empathetic. I would say things that just came from the top of my mind, right? So there were things I wish I said that I would change, right? I've had to grow in that way. When I first went to MIT, I had the idea that I'm just here to get my degree, get out, right? I wish I spent more time knowing, I had friends, but knowing the rest of my classmates. There's a social aspect to the undergraduate curriculum. And maybe as a child of immigrant parents, I knew we didn't have a lot of money. I knew it was a privilege that I got to go to MIT. I had to take loans out and things like that. I was under the mindset that, yeah, I'm here to get a degree. I can't, this has to be 4 years, that's it. I can't do this 5-6 year thing. We don't have the money for that. I need to make sure that I pass my classes. So I was very intent with those types of things. So maybe there's some clubs I missed out. There was some social aspect that I missed out because of that. And I do think of that sometimes, right? That I could have been more social, but I was really focused really on, achieving that degree and moving on. And so I didn't have that research experience. You know, I know undergraduate students who apply for PhDs, they're like in the labs for 3 years, 4 years. I didn't have that. I tend to be a shy person, so I don't think many of my faculty members even knew who I was, right? There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 5 black women in chemical engineering my year. And I think they always mistook me for the other girl. I know her well, but I think still today they probably wouldn't know the difference between the two of us. I mean, I was there because I always show up, but I didn't really have a connection to my lecturers at the time. And you know, they were intimidating, right? I know how, as an undergraduate student, you're intimidated by your faculty members. But these are MIT faculty. They're world-renowned. It didn't make sense to me then, but it makes sense to me now. Like, these are world-renowned scientists who are top of their field. I could have taken advantage of that. I could have talked to them more. I could have engaged with them more. But I didn't. And so that's something that I wish I could do over, right? So I didn't learn it there, but, you know, as I grew into who I am now, you know, this is why graduate school was wonderful for me, right? I learned to speak up more. I learned to not necessarily be intimidated by the hierarchical structure of academia, right? Assistant, associate, full professors, distinguished professors, dean, provost, right? We are all humans. We're all accessible. We are in academia, we're in teaching. That's why we want to get to know, to talk to people and students. And I didn't quite get that. And that's something that I definitely wish I could do over in the past. Yeah.
So I was curious, how did this change happen? I guess it's not just overnight. You realize, oh, there's a problem, I will change, and then you start immediately going to spend more time with other people to be more social. So how did that happen, and why you changed your mindset?
Oh. Yeah, there's a conscious effort to go outside of yourself, but then there's also an organic part to it. What do I mean by that? An analogy. I remember when I was in high school and I had to take the SATs. And I thought about SAT vocabulary. I'm like, I don't know what any of these words are. I'd never used this vocabulary. I watch, movies and TV, and people are eloquently speaking, using all these SAT words. I don't use any of that, right? But, 20 years later, right, you start using more of that vocabulary. Those SAT words are now not as daunting. They're not as confusing as you thought they were. You're like, oh, I know what that means now, because you've seen more of it, right? And as you grow, you end up having more, this is why diversity is important, you end up having more encounters with diverse people. You end up talking more, right? As a young person, sometimes all you talk to is your family, your siblings, maybe some cousins, right? The more you start opening up, the more you are introduced to different people, the more comfortable you feel talking to different people. And so it's just age, it's just experience. It just makes you, open up more, and putting yourself in uncomfortable positions at first, right? The more you do that, the more you get comfortable with uncomfortable positions, But and so that comes with time. It really does come with time. Yeah.
Let's see, so we have about 10 more minutes left. Maybe we'll ask a couple more questions. One is, I was curious about how you approach situations in which you give your students projects that, like you talked about the student, where maybe they don't go anywhere. And so how do you not feel personally responsible, right? And you don't feel this guilt, or how do you help put the student back on track and help that student regain confidence? And you also regain confidence. I feel that, at least personally, when I've worked with undergrads, if I give them a project that doesn't necessarily go well, I feel very personally responsible, and I'm wondering how you overcome those obstacles in research with your students.
Ooh, personally responsible.
Maybe you don't. I just, sometimes I do.
Well, let me ask you this. This experience with the student, does the student constantly, do you see the effort that the student puts in? Do you see the effort that they're constantly showing up, they're constantly doing something?
I mean, most of the time. As an undergrad, they usually work pretty closely with us as grad students, so I do see them often.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, in that case, you do start feeling personally responsible, like, oh, crap. I should have given them a better project, started off something easier so they can build their confidence and things like that. That happens. On the other case, sometimes when the students don't, undergraduates, they have classes, right? Mm-hmm. Right? And so if you feel like they're not putting in the time and the effort to get the results, you don't necessarily feel that personal responsibility for the research that's not moving forward. So go back to your question.
Just so how do you help the student then get back on track, and how do you help them think about the project in a new way and get them motivated to pursue maybe a completely separate project now, or to continue on this project in a slightly different direction?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from that question is how do you switch gears?
Yes. Thank you for boiling that down. That is exactly what I was asking.
How do you switch gears? Yeah. Radio silence is not good. How do you switch gears? And that to me is a more difficult question of how do you know when to let something go? Mm-hmm. Right? As scientists, we never want to quit. No, I remember my own experience that I went into my advisor's office. I had a project, and I said, it doesn't work. He's like, what do you mean it doesn't work? I was like, it doesn't work. And then he's like, okay, all right, then I guess we'll try something different. But I remember him raising his voice, but at that point, I was in my fourth year. I was like, this is not working. This has nothing to do with me. I put in the effort. But how do you do that for a novice student who doesn't have that confidence? This is when you have to be a life coach, right? Sometimes you say our research, sometimes we publish things that say, okay, it doesn't work, right? I've said that before. That is a scientific discovery in itself. Actually, I do have a paper like that said, hey, this stuff doesn't work. It's well cited. But anyways, that is a conclusion, right? Mm-hmm. And then we moved on to something else. It's a challenge to know when to let go of something and when to push forward. I don't know if I've mastered that myself. I do have data that sits in a file that's never seen the light of day.
Yeah. I've got a lot of that.
You got a lot of that? I'm sure most people do. And, I let go of that concept because I didn't think it was going anywhere. But it is a challenge to figure out what to let go and what to continue. And as scientists, a lot of us will continue to the end and keep on pushing. And maybe we'll drop it and then come back later. I've done that too. But that's a challenging question, right? I don't think I have a full answer for that yet. Yeah.
Well, in terms of projects, how how do you assign or allocate the different projects to students, or you let them bring up their own idea?
Yeah. Um, so my students in the beginning are always assigned a project based on typically the funding that I have. I need to gather the data for, and we start off small, and then any good funded proposal has very clear metrics of what needs to be done. Typically, in my experience, students who enter the program, they need that clear idea of what has to be done, right? It's only when we start gathering data and they start reading that they start to have their own ideas. And so I've had students in the past look into, oh, you know what, I can apply this technique to a different source of particles. And so one of my students, she did, we usually do atmospheric particles, but she thought, oh, I'm really interested in learning more about vaping and e-cigarettes and things like that. So essentially she generated e-cigarette aerosols and did the characterization technique that we use for atmospheric aerosols and e-cigarettes, right?
That's really cool.
Right, and I say she did it, but you know what she did? She actually got an undergraduate that she worked with to work with her essentially and take the data to do it, right? And use that for a thesis chapter, which we have yet to publish. That's a whole different story. So, so seeing those connections, right? And that happened later on in her PhD. But knowing, oh yeah, she could do this, and she could take this instrument and apply it to a new realm. You really start to be able to develop that later on when you've done the literature reading, right? You know how to do searches, you know where the gaps are. That really does come later on. And then sometimes, as a PhD, I knew about those things, but I didn't have the time because I was constantly being pushed to do different projects. And that's why I said the postdoc was glorious for me, because in the postdoc, I had the time, right, to really think about things, and I had the time to run different types of experiments, which I enjoyed immensely.
Yeah, I think the idea of letting students do sort of whatever they want in the later period of their PhD study is a really good idea, because it gives them the opportunity to manage the projects and also the people.
Yeah, I forgot. Someone once told me at that point you should just become an assistant professor.
That's how I feel when you first told us this.
Yeah, they're like, oh no, you're here to work on my projects and get them done. If you have your own ideas, put them in a book and then wait till your own PI and then get them done. Always write down your own ideas, and then at some point you'll have the time to do them. And that's just somehow the structure of the sciences and engineering. But never let go of those ideas. Those ideas are, the ones that win Nobels at the end of the day. So always write them down. They're critical.
I have a couple more questions, or one more for me, and if you want to ask one more. I was curious about, so to come back to this idea of dancing, I love dancing, and being included. I wonder if you can think of things that we all should be doing to be more inclusive, right? When I think about inclusion, I think there are students who are very young who have so much potential, who are either in high school and going on to college or whatnot, or even going on to grad school after that, who have a lot of doors that are closed to them, and they have to navigate how to open those doors or how to overcome barriers. And so how can we unlock doors for more people and lower a lot of barriers for people so that they can also be a part of the party and be dancing?
I would say first, you need to take inventory of where you are and who is in your lab. Do you ever just stop for a second and say, who am I working with? I feel as a woman, as a person of color, I do this every time I enter a room. I'm like, oh, I'm the only woman here, or oh, I'm the only black person here, or that's something that I do quite regularly. It's just part of who I am. But I think we all need to do that more often. And then when you take a look at the survey the room or survey the space you're in, I think we need to ask ourselves, how can we change it? Who do I know that I haven't reached out to who could help me change the space? Who is in my network, who's in my social network that I can bring in to engage in projects together, right? Not just necessarily of my interest, but of their interest as well, right? Science is more than just thinking, okay, I'm just going to do what I want to do and have that narrow focus. It's trying to find connections, making bridges with others, right? And so how can we do that? I remember one of my first outreach projects was with the Riverside, was in the Unified Riverside School District. And I had a student, she was interested in like Mars. My research has nothing to do with Mars. But after talking to her, we came up with this idea where she was going to look at the particle composition in Mars. There's a lot of dust, right? And so what's the potential to form clouds on particle dust and things like that? And she went to first place in the high school science fair, right? She now is in medical school at VCU, right? But you would think our two ideas were completely disparate, right? There was no way that we could actually get together and do something of interest. But it takes some creativity, right? It took some, okay, I'm willing to put in the energy to make this happen. It does take energy. There's an energetic barrier to really making collaborations happen. And you have to be willing to invest in that. Especially when you see that there are spaces where people need to be included, where diversity needs to be included, and taking inventory of that and making it happen. It has to be an investment done.
Yeah, I think I really learned a lot because I used to think to change the problem is either someone offered to help or someone just trying to make the change themselves. But I've never thought about building the bridge between the two parties, and then so both of like people from different aspects will contribute to the same ultimate goal. That's really important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So
I have one more question.
Go for it, absolutely.
So thinking about the changes and making bridges, I'm really curious, is there anything you are not satisfied with your life or with your research right now and you want to change it? And how?
Okay, another tough question. Something that I'm not satisfied with. Yeah, of course. I'm just one of these, I know myself. I'm just one of these people who's always like 85% satisfied. And I know this could be detrimental, right? I always feel I could be doing more. I know many people feel that way. Yeah, there's more papers I could write. There's more proposals I could write, publish or perish. There's more time I could spend with my family. I'm supposed to be writing that book. I don't have one word. I'm supposed to be publishing. There's always more that I can do. But I sleep well at night. I won't lie. I sleep really well at night. And I've learned to, and that's part of the reason why I don't carry the Tums anymore. I've learned to just put it down and accept that there's things that will always have to get done. I do what I can in the day, and then I go sleep at night. I sleep well. Maybe I'll watch, some trashy TV for 30 minutes. Makes me feel good. Watch a movie, mindless stuff, and then start again the next day. Yeah, I'm not 100% satisfied. I'm 85% satisfied. That's pretty good to me. I am that faculty member who says, a B is pretty good. A B is pretty good. It's above average, 85%. It's hard to accept, especially as perfectionists. We want things to be perfect. We want it 100%. But I've just come to the point in my life where I realize it's really hard to get to 100%. It's maybe because I'm an engineer, it's theoretically impossible to get to 100%. When you think about the efficiency of things, 85% is awesome. Yeah. Okay? If you get to 90%, even better. There are some things that I'm not satisfied with, but I always take inventory and I think, okay, what can I do better? Oh, maybe I need to spend some more time doing some exercise. Maybe I need to spend some more time doing reading. I need to read more books, yeah. Maybe this break I'll go to the library and pick up some more books. I'm always just constantly thinking about what else I can do. And quite honestly, that's what I love about this job. I have that freedom, the academic freedom to say, oh, okay, maybe I'll try this month. Maybe I'll go on sabbatical, things like that. I have that flexibility, which I understand not everybody does have. And so I am grateful for those types of things, even though I'm not 100% satisfied.
Well, I think I can say that we're at least 100% satisfied with this podcast. I think maybe that's statistically incorrect, but thank you so much for sharing all of your ideas, perspectives, background, and experiences with us and with everyone that will be listening. We really, really appreciate it. And for coming out and doing Faces of Science Seminar Series. This is our sixth one, and we deeply appreciate everything you've done and everything you've shared with us and taught us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you again to Johnny Varelis for this podcast and for producing this podcast. And so with that, is there anything else you want to add, Judge? Sorry, I totally did not go by what was said on here, so I totally messed you up. That's okay. But with that, we will go ahead and finish here, and we look forward to your science talk in about 15 minutes. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.